Clint Eastwood thought he was there for a simple interview. Jimmy Kimmel thought he could turn a legend into a punchline. Neither men realized they were about to create television history. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and make sure to hit the subscribe button for more untold hidden encounters. The bright lights of the Hollywood studio had illuminated countless celebrities, but they'd never captured what was about to unfold. Clint Eastwood, weathered but unbowed by his 90s, stepped into the green room, running a calloused hand over his face. He was here for one reason: to promote a film he believed in. A film about standing your ground when the world tries to take what's yours. As he settled into the leather chair backstage, sipping black coffee that matched the intensity of his gaze, his assistant Renee hovered nearby, concern etched into her features. She'd warned the producers earlier, voice hushed but firm. Mr. Eastwood isn't here for games. He's here to discuss his work. The producers had nodded politely, but their eyes betrayed them. They were hunting for viral moments, not substance. They'd pay for that miscalculation soon enough. The monitor flickered with Jimmy Kimmel's opening monologue, the host dissecting celebrity mishaps to audience laughter. Clint's expression didn't change, but his fingers tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm on the armrest. A subtle tell that Renee recognized immediately. "They're going to try something," she murmured to a passing stage hand, who shrugged, oblivious to the gathering storm. When the stage manager signaled it was time, Clint rose with purpose, straightening his jacket with a single fluid motion. The band struck up a Western-inspired riff as Jimmy announced him. The man, the myth, the legend. While the audience erupted, Clint's walk was measured, his posture straight, his presence filling the room before he'd said a word. He shook Jimmy's hand with an iron grip and took his seat, eyes sweeping the set with the assessment of a gunfighter sizing up an opponent. The battle was about to begin, and only one man would walk away with his dignity intact. The studio audience of Late Night with Jimmy Kimmel was electric with anticipation. Their applause thundered as Clint Eastwood took his seat. The living embodiment of Hollywood's golden era facing the king of late-night comedy. The cameras captured everything. Clint's weather-beaten face contrasting with Jimmy's polished smile. Two men from different worlds about to collide. Jimmy started safely asking about the new film. A stark drama about a rancher fighting corporate land developers. Clint leaned forward, his voice rough yet commanding as he spoke about principle, about standing firm against corruption. Every word landed with weight, the audience hanging on each syllable. "It's about a man who won't be moved," Clint said, his eyes intense beneath heavy brows. "Someone who stands his ground when everything's pushing against him." Jimmy nodded, but his eyes betrayed a restlessness. This thoughtful conversation wasn't the entertaining segment he'd planned. He needed something lighter, something that would trend online by morning. With a practiced pivot, he tossed out a quip about Clint's cowboy days. "So, do you still ride horses these days, or is it just golf carts around the studio lot now?" Jimmy asked with a grin. Clint's answer was clipped. "When it matters." The audience chuckled nervously, sensing the shift in atmosphere. There was an edge to Clint's tone that Jimmy either missed or chose to ignore. Trying to recover momentum, Jimmy dug deeper. "I heard this great story about you getting into a scuffle on the set of an old Western. Care to share that with us?" Clint's eyes narrowed slightly. "Didn't happen," he said flatly, the three syllables slicing through the studio air. A ripple of discomfort moved through the audience. Jimmy's smile flickered, but held as he reached beneath his desk. "Well, I've got something fun here. A little throwback for the fans." He produced a tacky cowboy hat, holding it up like a trophy. "Come on, Clint. One quick shot for social media." The audience clapped encouragingly, but Clint remained still, his stare now laser-focused on Jimmy. "Put that away," he said, not raising his voice, but each word carried to the furthest corner of the studio. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the band members exchanged glances, sensing the tension crackling across the stage. Backstage, Renee shook her head. "This is about to get ugly," she whispered to nobody in particular. Jimmy forced a laugh, setting the hat down on his desk. All right. No hats tonight," he said, trying to recover. "Let's get back to the film." But something had shifted in the atmosphere. The audience sensed it. The balance of power tilting away from their host, the script being crumpled before their eyes. Jimmy began asking about the film's production, but Clint leaned forward, cutting him off. "It's about people who don't roll over," he said deliberately. "Folks who fight when the world tries to take what's theirs, not about playing dress-up for laughs." The jab landed squarely, and gasps mingled with scattered applause. Jimmy's smile tightened as his fingers drummed nervously on the desk. You know, Clint continued unprompted, I came here to talk about something real. His eyes swept across the set, taking in the lights, the cameras, the audience. Not to be some sideshow for your ratings. The crowd stirred, divided in their reaction, some cheering Clint's authenticity, others uncomfortable with the confrontation. Jimmy's quick wit faltered as he glanced toward the producer, who was frantically signaling to wrap up the segment. I've been in this game longer than you've been alive, Clint told Jimmy, his voice steady but edged with steel. I don't need to play your games to sell a story. Some audience members shouted support for Clint while others heckled, the room splitting into factions. Jimmy tried to regain control, leaning forward with a strange smile. Hey, we're just having fun here, Clint. No need to get heated, he said, attempting to sound casual. Let's talk about your directing style instead. I've always been curious about how you work with actors. But Clint wasn't having it. Fun. He repeated the word dripping with disdain. You call this fun? Parading people out here to make them look foolish. He gestured at the entire setup, the lights, the cameras, the spectacle. The audience buzzed with energy left feeding off the raw tension. Behind the scenes, production staff were panicking. The director barked orders to prepare a commercial break, but executives were noting the spiking ratings and wanted to let the confrontation play out. Renee paced backstage, muttering that she'd warned them. On the monitors, Clint's granite expression made it clear he wasn't backing down. Jimmy attempted to joke his way out of the corner, but his quips fell flat against Clint's stoic presence. He tried changing topics, asking about Clint's favorite roles from decades past. Clint cut him off again. You don't get it, he said, his voice rising just enough to command attention. This isn't about me. It's about respect for the work, for the people watching. The crowd roared in response, many standing now. The studio transformed into something between a rally and a courtroom. Jimmy had reached his limit. He leaned forward, professional veneer cracking. Look, Clint, we're just trying to give the fans what they want, he said, gesturing toward the audience. They love you. They want to see the legend. It was the wrong move. Clint's eyes flashed with intensity. They don't want a clown, he replied, voice low but razor sharp. They want the truth. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. For a moment, the entire studio held its breath. Then a heckler shouted something unintelligible from the back, breaking the spell. Jimmy seized the opportunity, standing up and clapping his hands. All right, we'll take a quick break, folks, he announced with forced cheerfulness. The band began playing, but Clint remained seated, his eyes fixed on Jimmy as the host squirmed under his gaze. The band played loudly, trying to drown out the tension, but the strategy failed. The studio crackled with energy, some audience members chanting Clint's name, others calling for Jimmy to fight back. Jimmy stood clapping, forcing a smile, but his eyes darted to the floor producer who frantically signaled for a commercial break. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the train wreck unfolding live. Clint hadn't moved from his chair, his stare boring into Jimmy like a laser. Backstage, Renee cursed under her breath, watching the monitors. The director was torn between cutting to commercials and riding the rating spike this confrontation was generating. As the music faded, Jimmy sat again, leaning toward Clint, speaking quietly but not quite off mic. Let's just cool it. All right, we'll talk about the movie. Clint didn't blink. You had your chance, he replied, his voice like steel, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. The crowd stirred, smartphones recording what was already becoming a viral sensation. Jimmy's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged on his own turf. He glanced at the audience, trying to gauge their mood, then decided to play to them. Folks, we love Clint, right? He said, raising his hands to encourage applause. Some clapped, but the response was scattered, the room too divided to unite. Clint leaned back, crossing his arms, expression unreadable. He wasn't there to win a popularity contest. He was making a point. The stage manager near the wing signaled Jimmy to wrap it up, but the host wasn't ready to concede. He tried one last time to redirect, picking up a cue card with questions about the film's cast and Clint's directing. But Clint had had enough of the script. You're not listening, he said, interrupting Jimmy mid-sentence. This isn't about the movie anymore. It's about you thinking you can turn me into a prop for your show. The audience gasped. Some shouted encouragement at Clint while others booed, the division in the room growing sharper. Jimmy's smile vanished entirely, his face flushing. Come on, man. It's just TV, he said, spreading his hands in appeal. "We're all here to have a good time." Clint shook his head slowly. "Not me," he said. "I came to talk about something that matters. You turned it into a circus." The words hit like a physical blow, and the crowd erupted, half cheering, half jerrying. Renee nodded grimly from the wings, watching as Clint took down another ego. The director finally called for a commercial break. The monitors flashed to ads, the band stopped playing, and the house lights dimmed slightly. But Clint remained in his chair, unmoved like a statue carved from defiance. Jimmy stood whispering urgently to the floor producer, gesturing sharply in frustration. The audience grew restless, some chanting Clint's name, others arguing among themselves. Security edged closer to the stage. 2 guards in black suits watching Clint wearily. Renee stepped forward, catching the stage manager's arm. "Don't even think about touching him," she warned, her voice quiet, but fierce. The stage manager backed off, but tension continued to build. During the break, producers huddled together, voices raised, trying to salvage the show. Jimmy paced near his desk, running a hand through his hair, muttering to himself. He knew he was losing control, but wasn't sure how to recover. Clint sat calmly, drinking water a stagehand had brought, scanning the audience, reading the room. A few fans in the front row tried to catch his attention, one calling out, "You're the man, Clint." He acknowledged them with a slight nod, nothing more. As the break ended, the director made a decision. Let Clint stay. But Jimmy needed to reassert control. The cameras started rolling again. The band played their intro and Jimmy forced himself back to the desk, his expression a mask of professionalism. But Clint was ready for round 2, and conciliation wasn't on his agenda. The studio lights brightened. The band's final notes faded, and the audience settled with anticipatory murmurs. Jimmy slid into his chair, smile strained like a boxer returning to the ring after a brutal round. Clint hadn't moved, his eyes fixed somewhere past Jimmy, as if the host were merely a distraction. The crowd remained divided, some still chanting for Clint, others waiting for Jimmy to regain the upper hand. Backstage, Renee watched with crossed arms, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. The director's voice crackled through headsets. "Keep it tight, Jimmy. Don't let him run the show." Jimmy clapped once, attempting to refocus the room. "We're back with the one and only Clint Eastwood," he announced, his tone deliberately lighter. He asked about the film's cinematography, hoping to ground the conversation in Clint's expertise. But Clint wasn't there for softball questions. He answered briefly about the stark visuals, then shifted without warning. "You know what's wrong with places like this?" he asked, gesturing at the set. "You think it's all about flash making noise. You forget what's real." The crowd stirred, some applauding, others shifting uncomfortably. Jimmy nodded as if understanding the point. "Fair enough," he conceded, leaning back. "But this is entertainment, right? People want a show." He gestured to the audience, fishing for support. "They want honesty," Clint countered, his voice cutting through the noise, "not some polished lie you feed them to keep them clapping." The words landed like a slap, and the crowd's reaction was instant. A roar of approval from some, cheers from others. Jimmy's smile vanished as his fingers gripped the desk edge. He was losing the room and he knew it. The floor producer signaled frantically to pivot, but Jimmy's pride was engaged now. He leaned in, his tone sharper. "Look, Clint, you're a legend. Nobody's arguing that, but you're on my stage and we've got a show to do." It was a direct challenge, and the audience felt it, their noise spiking. Clint's eyes narrowed just slightly, but it was enough to make the air feel heavier. "Your stage," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I'm here because I chose to be, not to dance for you." The crowd exploded, many standing and shouting Clint's name, while others called for Jimmy to push back. Security guards edged closer, but remained hesitant, wary of confronting a legend. Jimmy finally stood, breaking the host's cardinal rule of staying seated. "You want to talk respect," he demanded, pointing at Clint. "How about respecting the people who invited you here?" The audience was on its feet, the noise deafening as cheers and boos collided. Clint stood slowly, his heightened presence filling the stage. He didn't raise his voice, but every word carried. "Respect's earned," he said, stepping closer to Jimmy, not bought with lights and applause. The studio erupted. The director screamed to cut, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing the moment Jimmy's show became Clint's battleground. Face to face they stood, the air between them electric. Jimmy's face flushed with rage and embarrassment as he fought to save his show. Security approached the stage, but hesitated, unsure how to handle a confrontation with Clint Eastwood. Renee pushed through from the wings, warning them off with a fierce glare. Jimmy broke first, stepping back and forcing a laugh that sounded like a cough. "All right, Clint, you've made your point," he said, voice tight. "Let's give it up for Clint Eastwood, folks." Some clapped, but the applause drowned in shouts, the room too charged to settle. Clint remained unmoved, weighing whether to say more. The floor producer signaled security to intervene, and one guard cautiously approached. "Sir, let's take a walk," he suggested respectfully. Clint turned to him, his stare stopping the man cold. "Don't," he said simply. Not a threat, but a command. The guard retreated immediately. Renee stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "He's leaving when he's ready," she informed the producers sharply. Clint raised a hand to silence her, then looked from Jimmy to the audience. "I said what I came to say," he announced, voice steady and final. Without another word, he turned and walked off stage, his stride unhurried and deliberate. Jimmy stood alone at center stage, the band scrambling to play something to fill the void. "Well, that was something," he said with a forced smile, his voice shaky. The audience laughed, but the sound was uneven, the energy fractured. Backstage, producers frantically discussed damage control while Renee followed Clint to the green room where he calmly collected his jacket. "Told him not to push you," she muttered. Clint just nodded. "Already pasted it. Mission accomplished." Outside, social media exploded with clips of the confrontation. Viewers taking sides in what would become a defining moment in late-night television history. The show limped to its conclusion. Jimmy rushing through remaining segments. His usual charm diminished. Everything was overshadowed by what had just happened. The night Hollywood's last outlaw refused to play by the rules. As Clint stepped into the evening air, the studio behind him still buzzing with fallout, it was clear he hadn't just left a talk show. He'd drawn a line that Hollywood wouldn't soon forget.